Hi, this is Josh Marshall, and this is the Josh Marshall Podcast. We're getting towards the end of April, and one of the sub themes of this episode is going to be whether Kate and I get through the episode without having a sneezing fit or a joint sneezing fit, even though we're hundreds of miles apart. I think everybody, at least I don't know what it is in the rest of the country, but at least in the Northeast and the East Coast, allergies are pretty bad. So if you are a fellow sufferer, we salute you. So that's just a little thing I just wanted to wanted to mention in case you wonder as the episode goes by. We got a lot to discuss. We have big speech this evening by President Biden. You know, it's funny. I almost caught myself calling him Vice President Biden. I'm still sort of there's I don't know if you have this, but I still, um, we're only 3 months in, but I still have moments where I'm like, wow, Joe Biden's president. Didn't expect that. I don't mean I didn't expect it like, last October or something like that. I think in retrospect, I probably expected it a little more confidently than I should have expected it. I just mean more over the course of the last, in some ways over the course of the last half century, but really over the course of the last 10 or 15 years. As you know, Biden ran for president in 2008. That kind of went nowhere. That was his second full run at it. He had the other run, I believe, in 1988, where he started with a lot of fanfare. He was, I think, in his mid 40s at the time, more or less, something like that. Young guy. Kind of one of these people who people had been expecting to run for president for a long time, and it didn't go well. And he had this plagiarism scandal that I have always thought was basically bogus. Political speeches are copied right and left. And he was largely dinged for the fact that he gave a speech about his being, the first member of his family to get a university education. And this guy Neil Kinnock, who was, ages and ages ago, the head of the Labor Party, or the head of the Labor Party, never prime minister, to his great chagrin in the UK, had given a similar speech. And it was clear that the speech sort of patterned off that, but it was true for both of them. So that was always kind of bogus. And then he had this kind of health crisis afterwards. I don't remember exactly, but I think he had some sort of, kind of brain bleed or something like that. I don't remember all the details, uh, but and then he kind of went back to being a senator. And the thing that is maybe not at the front of our recollection now is that one of the reasons Barack Obama chose Joe Biden, there's lots of reasons, but one of the reasons was because it seemed clear that he was too old and too unsuccessful in his earlier presidential shots, but mainly too old to have any future presidential ambitions. So you have someone who can just focus on being vice president. They're not kind of angling and trying to kind of, collect chits and stuff to be president after, to run for president after you're president and all that kind of stuff. They just focus on you. And that was actually a model that was in some ways pioneered by President Bush with Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney was older. He had already had a few heart attacks, even as a very young man. So he was never going. The idea was he's never going to run for president. He can just focus on being vice president. And often during Obama's presidency, Biden kind of leaned into this comic relief aspect of his personality as a, not to say he wasn't doing a lot of stuff in the background and a lot of serious stuff, but he kind of played that role, right? Uncle Joe, good guy, got the aviator glasses, all that all that sort of thing. And it's just remarkable how things evolve, and here we are. And I was on another show yesterday. I was talking about this, that it's really the last thing that one could have expected almost at any point in Joe Biden's career. Either the young up and coming Joe Biden, the sort of the old Joe Biden. None of those Joe Bidens were someone who you'd expect, oh, he's gonna become president and make a go at being kind of like an FDR, LBJ, sort of like big government, transformative liberal agenda thing. That was like, you could imagine a lot of things, but that was not one of them ever. And that's not because Biden's so conservative. I think that this whole idea that got going in the 2020 primary campaign, that Biden's this big conservative or something, conservative Democrat, even moderate Democrat, even that wasn't really true. Biden, his whole political career is just a consensus Democrat, consensus liberal Democrat, moderate liberal Democrat, something like that. Kind of going to be where the party is, wherever it is. That's kind of that's kind of his thing. So we have this speech tonight, and that's one of the things that we are going to talk about. We're gonna make another stab at making sense of what political moment we're in here. And one of the things we're going to talk about is, kind of where are Republicans? Yes, they're kind of opposing everything. Um, Although there's a little talk now that they're having some kind of negotiations about, sort of the hard infrastructure part of the next part of the legislative agenda. I mean, we'll see. We'll see where that goes. Who knows? Um, but they seem, they're kind of trying different culture war things on for size. And in general, it kind of doesn't seem to be going much of anywhere. And Biden's popularity by historical standards, his popularity has been quite low for a newly inaugurated president. But in an era of extreme polarization, it's been fairly robust, consistently over 50%, 52%, 54%, something like that. Kind of it's been basically the inverse of President Trump's, especially in the beginning of his presidency. But who are we kidding? The beginning of his presidency was the whole thing was the same. Pretty much it is remarkable the extent to which President Trump consistently had maybe, 42% public support and 52, 53%, kind of low 40s support, low 50s opposition. And that kind of wobbled around here and there. You had that period, I guess it was maybe in the second half of 2017, where he kind of got down into the high 30s for a bit. And he cratered after he tried to overthrow the government at the end, but that kind of makes sense. But basically very consistent, and Biden is the inverse of that. So we're gonna get into all those things. We're also gonna this is the second episode where pardon me, like I said, my allergies are killing me here. This is second episode where we're going to answer your questions. So here's the thing. Remember, get your questions in. Seriously, what the hell? We had like a ton of questions first episode, but I guess we didn't make clear this is an ongoing feature. So like not a lot of questions this time. Seriously, send in your questions. We want to hear what you're thinking about, what you would like to hear us discuss, questions that you would like to hear us answer, all that good stuff. Before we get into the rest, it's spring. You can tell that it's spring because I'm sniffling because it's allergies and all that kind of stuff. But one day, it just became spring, and suddenly we're doing spring stuff. That means tailgates, picnics, camping, and cold brew iced coffee. Grady's all-in-one cold brew kit makes 36 servings of gourmet New Orleans style coffee for less than $1 a cup. Just add water and store it in your fridge for cold brewed iced coffee you'll want to sip all spring. And to be sure to take some on your next vacation so you never have to worry about missing your morning brew. Ready to give it a swirl? Get 25% off your first order at Grady'sColdBrew.com with promo code TPM. That's Grady'sColdBrew.com with promo code TPM. Okay, Kate, co-host and producer. Did we figure out the new title, or is that still like in limbo? We're still figuring that out. Oh,
Monarch.
well, okay,
Supreme
there you go.
leader,
So
all in the mix.
yeah, so what are we talking about?
Well, coming at you silky smooth with my new audio setup. It's Kate
Oh,
on the
right.
ones
We got
and
the new.
twos.
Yeah, there you go.
But yeah, so we're talking about this week. There has been an immense explosion of right wing nonsense. All of it basically fabricated, and much of it kind of a good window into how alarmingly fast disinformation spreads throughout the right wing, kind of media ecosystem. Going from one, in two of these cases, one, really shoddy, slapdash, not really reported article leaps to Fox News, leaps from Fox News to right wing radio and all the different tentacles of the Fox News kind of empire.
And didn't the I guess we're talking about the Kamala Harris non children's book thing, and that started at the Post. So kind of ricocheting from different nodes of the Murdoch empire.
Right, and then
Now,
and then
go ahead.
the fake red meat ban, and I can run through both of these scandals for people who aren't up on them, but that started at the Daily Mail, which is a British tabloid. So those two cases were very parallel, and kind of the seed was planted, picked up by Fox, dispersed through Fox, kind of like blood cells and veins, right into the Twitter feeds of, Lauren Boebert and Don Trump Jr. And
so let me ask on the children's book thing. This was kind of the thing with meat. Most climate people will tell you that to confront the climate crisis, we need to seriously rejigger how much of the planet is dedicated to raising cows to kill them really quickly so we can all have hamburgers. There's all sorts of stuff there. So in that case, the idea that our diets may need to change because of climate change is not taken out of nowhere. They made this up, but it's the whole concept isn't from nowhere. And in this case of the Kamala Harris children's book, this really was, as far as I can tell, just made up out of whole cloth. And the funny thing was, to me, I mean, I consider myself pretty plugged in, and I'm way too plugged into Twitter. Like, I find myself in a kind of a fugue state, like 10 times a day, just on Twitter. Like, what am I doing here? Like, how am I still on Twitter? What am I doing? But that was a case where I only found out about it after the first I heard was how it had been debunked.
Yeah.
Like, it was so quick. It was such a quick cycle. I don't even know how long it was kind of a live thing before. And that was a case where a lot of these things with right-wing media, they come out, they get debunked on factcheck.org or Washington, that Kessler guy on Washington Post gives it some Pinocchios, but it's never like recanted in the original sources. It just kind of it just sort of becomes part of the ambient air of disinformation. But this one had a really quick half-life. So walk us through what did the original thing say?
Okay, so we'll start with the Harris book thing. So what happened there is a photographer who is like a stringer for Reuters took a picture at this migrant child intake center in Long Beach, California. And one of those pictures had a children's book that Harris wrote some time back, uh, in kind of in the pile of stuff. And so the New York Post takes that picture and baselessly concludes that the welcome kits that these children are getting have all had a copy of her book slipped into them, despite the fact this is based on a picture of one book at this site. So then Fox News picks it up, covers it heavily, same way as the New York Post, no fact checking, nothing like that. And, sure enough, soon we have Ronna McDaniel, Tom Cotton, kind of tweeting their outrage about this. And then, meanwhile, actual news outlets are doing the work of asking Long Beach officials, is this true? And they said exactly one copy of this book got donated in like a citywide donation drive for people to give things to these children. And then, weird enough. And then it gets even crazier because the New York Post takes down this article, no correction, no retraction, and just for our listeners, that's very outside the bounds of journalistic practice. You don't just get to mess up and be like, oh, erase, 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 hope nobody notices. So they rip down the article. Fox News does this very gentle correction on air when they apologize for if they implied that there were more books than one, which they didn't imply it. They stated it outright. And their kind of online corresponding article with the coverage they had done on the network, that stayed up and untouched. So then we have the original article from the New York Post is put back up with an author's note, kind of clarifying the mistake. And then you have the reporter who wrote that New York Post article tweets that she resigned because she was, quote, forced into writing the article and she didn't push back hard enough. And that was the final straw for her. And then at this point, Fox adds a correction to their online article where they say the implied thing and says they also sneak in there is at least one copy of Harris's book at the site, at least one, without any proof that there are multiple copies, and having the officials say there was one. So
right,
yeah,
right. So and one of the things that always strikes me about this is that there's many years ago now there was the I think Jason Blair was his name, a big scandal at the Times where one of their kind of hotshot up and coming reporters was exposed of just having written numerous fake articles, right? Just or at least articles about news stories with quotes from people who didn't exist, reporting on the scene from places that he wasn't, just kind of every news organization's and editor's worst nightmare. It was a big scandal. And different news organizations have these scandals. These things happen. And one of the things that is so striking is that never happens when it is a Fox News or New York Post or almost anywhere in the right-wing media ecosystem. It just doesn't matter. Basically, it just literally doesn't matter. And I think the reason it doesn't matter is that it does not contradict anyone's assumptions. There is this tacit common understanding on the right and left about what these organizations are, that they're basically kind of propaganda organizations. So if you kind of if you're, owning the libs a little with kind of like a bogus story, like, okay, yeah, put up a correction or something like that. But it doesn't change anybody's perceptions. Why should it? That's what the New York Post is. Half the stuff the New York Post publishes is like that. I mean, that may be a bit of an overstatement, but not much, right? And the same with Fox News. And it's very telling. I mean, if you had something that was just completely based on nothing and fabricated and got taken down at like the Times or the Post or the Washington Post, or any legitimate news organization, there would be a ton of media stories about it, navel gazing, and the reporter would be canned, and there would be this and that and the other. There's just none of that, because again, it doesn't it doesn't change anybody's perceptions. We know those, and I saw someone said to me when I was saying this today, oh, well, people on the right, they definitely think those are legitimate news organizations. They think they're the best, the only ones telling the truth. And that's kind of true in the sense that, yes, a lot of conservatives say, oh, I only listen to Fox News. It's the only place that's really telling us the truth. But people on the right, the sort of Trumpian right, the revanchist right, don't have the same understandings of what a news organization is as Democrats, kind of people who aren't from that world. Um, so we have that. So what are the other
Yeah,
two? We have that. We have the
I do
meat
want to say
thing.
one thing on this story first, which is, well, two things. One of which I think you're totally right that people know that Fox News does not hold itself to the same kind of rigorous journalistic standards as CNN. But the problem with that is, even if people know that, that's not how it's treated. I mean, Fox News has its seat in the White House briefing room. Like when you say the roundup of networks, you say NBC, ABC, Fox News, and it's constantly kind of lumped in with these other groups. And you have other prominent reporters, especially kind of in more the broadcast journalism world, stand by Fox News reporters when they're snubbed or, excluded from events and everything. And it's this completely damaging, I think, double standard where it's like Fox gets to have the gravitas of a serious news outlet or, network without having to do the due diligence that actual journalists have to do, and without doing anything more than these, kind of gentle, half-assed apologies on air where they say, oh, so sorry if we may have implied something that led to this right wing outrage cyclone for the last few days that we absolutely meant to trigger. Anyway, on to the next thing. And, I think it's part of what makes Fox News so damaging is because it gets to stand on the same pedestal with the other networks, but doesn't hold itself to any kind of fact checking standard. And then the other piece of this is more of a personal thing, but to me, the hardest part about being a reporter is your mistakes are so public. And not only that, but now, especially since the Trump era, you have a really rabid group of people who are rooting for you to make a mistake, who are eager to kind of flay you online and to say, look, fake news. When you, even if it's an honest mistake that you made and corrected and everything like that. And those people have been fomented by Fox News doesn't even make mistakes, that just happily peddles disinformation as news and then still pretends to be a serious outlet. So it's this weird cycle that's been happening. And some of those same dynamics apply as well to the meat ban story, which I can run us down, give us an outline of. So this seed of disinformation started late last week when the Daily Mail, a British tabloid, ran a story where they decided to fill in the holes of what we don't know about Biden's climate change plan yet, because he hasn't announced it. We've gotten some tidbits. The White House put out a fact sheet, but we haven't gotten the comprehensive thing. So the Daily Mail runs a story that is essentially, here's what could be in the plan, and then picked things that were specifically likely to rile people up, right-wing people up and get them mad. And one of the things they said is it could entail a dietary shift. And then they found this study done by researchers at the University of Michigan in 2020, where these guys ran different test scenarios to see what kind of dietary shifts would have the biggest effects on greenhouse gas emissions. And in one of those scenarios, they tested dropping beef consumption by 90% and then other animal food products by 50%. And they found that halved the amount of greenhouse emissions connected to our diets. So the Daily Mail basically plucks out the 90%, which is, again, just one of the scenarios in this hypothetical testing that I spoke to the researchers and they told me this was not intended to be a policy proposal. This is just what we do, you know? So they pluck out the
Right.
90% and they say Biden's plan could entail a 90% drop in beef consumption, which they calculated out to mean one average sized hamburger a month. So that's their article. Fox News, less than about 12 hours later, Fox News found the story, is running it, has a graphic up where they have, it says requirements for Biden's climate plan, and then says 90% drop in beef consumption, one hamburger a month. And then you have, various Fox News hosts being like, get ready, your 4th of July is going to suck. Like, you might as well just have Brussels sprouts. You can't have any meat, And it was days of that with that completely just wrong graphic. And then the first time they walk it back at all is not till Monday when John Roberts, one of their show hosts, again, does this very gentle correction on air when they're like, oh, we're sorry if we gave anyone the idea that XYZ. Not first of all, that correction was connected to a segment that was from Friday, so clearly not a lot of urgency in correcting that stuff. But again, it wasn't implied. It wasn't we're sorry if we gave anyone the impression. It stated outright just incorrect information, which then got into the hands of Lauren Boebert and Don Jr., who tweeted about it furiously and completely meshed this study and the climate change plan, which hasn't been released yet. I mean, it happened just so fast, over the course of like 2 or 3 days. It went from completely made up Daily Mail story to all over the right wing kind of internet spaces. And
Well, I think one thing that, again, going back to this point about different standards, that legitimate journalists make mistakes. It's sort of in the nature of journalism. You make mistakes. It's an iterative process. Um, but in legitimate journalism, you have, there's a process. You have to correct it, and you have to publicly correct it, and that process of doing legitimate journalism becomes the evidence point about the fake news. And the fact that the New York Posts and the Fox Newses and stuff don't really do that, or sort of, say, oh, well, look, maybe, kind of sorry if you were offended, sorry if you misunderstood, sort of, kind of corrections. It perpetuates this idea. Well, Fox News doesn't seem to make any mistakes, because we see other news organizations having to do corrections all the time, and Fox doesn't. So they must, they must be rock solid.
totally.
It's just that it's a different idea of what news media is. And these things, yes, they are uh, they are gradations at some level, but there's some basic differences. And the other, it's funny, there's a I frequently see there is a dialogue within legitimate journalism that each time there's some mistaken story, but some big retraction, something that someone gets wrong, there's this um sort of avalanche of self-flagellating, to the extent this is going to give even more, put more wind in the sails of people who think we're all fake news. We've got to, we wonder why so few people trust the press. We wonder this. We wonder that. I, Look, people make mistakes. They need to correct their mistakes. That's just what journalism is. It's an iterative process. Scientists make mistakes all the time, in the sense you have one theory, then it's disproven by new studies, right? It is, any working journalist will tell you they live in fear of getting something wrong. but it is also kind of part of it's an iterative process. And I really hate that self-flagellating, because the fact that someone gets a story wrong, that's not why people on the right are attacking journalists and calling, CNN fake news and stuff like that. That is an ideological thing about controlling the production of truth, for lack of a better word. It is not. It really has nothing to do with the fact that journalists get things wrong. Journalists have always gotten things wrong, and so there's just the idea that you have lack of trust in journalism, especially on the right, is an ideological thing. It's not a measure of the batting average of elite journalism. It's just not. They're really two separate things, and I wish that uh, the journalistic fraternity, maybe not a great word, the journalistic community, um, would be a little more self confident about that, and a little more aggressive in making its own case,
I,
because you get led around by people who are not arguing in good faith. Let's put
I
it
think
that
that's
way.
exactly right, and I think that's also why time for not Fox News to kind of be kicked out of the club, because there are just guidelines of what you have to do if you're a journalist. And if Fox News was going to run that story before they ran it on air for millions of viewers, it is incumbent upon them to check the Daily Mail's reporting, especially because it wasn't even really reporting, it wasn't sourced to anything. And, I talked to the researchers behind the study that got pulled into this, and they told me the first time they heard anything about this was Sunday morning when they got contacted by a fact checker from CNN. So Fox News had run this story for about 4 days without talking to them, without checking with the White House. Is this part of the climate change? Just smacked it into a graphic and sent it up on their screens. And if they're going to operate like that, fine. But I wish that journalists, those of us who actually do our due diligence, take accountability from our mistakes, but also do kind of the work on the front end to make sure we're not slapping up stuff that's wrong, would just stop agreeing to let them be part of the group, because I just think it gives them so much power that they get to be both a legitimate news organization that does none of the hard part of being a news organization, and more so willfully feeds their viewers disinformation that they know will have an emotional resonance and get them really mad and be a point of opposition against a president they don't like.
I don't know how much people remember this, or sort of before your time as an
Mm-hmm.
adult, Kate, that at the beginning of the Obama administration, so going on 15 years ago now, I guess, 13 years ago, um, the Obama crew made an effort to kind of, I don't think they were going to take Fox's credentials, but they maybe I'm misremembering that. I think it was more they made an effort to stigmatize Fox in the context of like the press briefings and stuff like that, to not call on Fox, kind of signal that we don't think you're a legit. You may have press credentials, but we don't think you're on an equal footing as real news organizations. We think you are basically a propaganda outfit with some news components. And as I think you alluded to, the there was massive pushback from all the other broadcast news. Like, kind of a real sense of solidarity. You're picking on Fox and stuff like this. And in the aftermath of what happened under President Trump, of all of his stuff, stigmatizing news, the lying press, the fake news, all that kind of stuff. I get where y- you don't want the people in political power sort of deciding who is press and who is not, based on ideology, kind of anything. You want it to be very hands off. So I don't think it would be a good idea to, like, kind of pull their press credentials or something like that, even though I don't think they really deserve to be there on an equal footing. It's just you that's just not a great idea, for a number of reasons. But I don't see I don't see the need or even the wisdom of pretending that Fox is another news organization. It's just different. It's really different. And even the sense of, like, well, let's have both sides. There's CNN and there's Fox. And again, it's not that I want to be here like, oh, CNN, the best news organization now, blah blah blah. It's just news organization, makes mistakes, does good stuff, does bad stuff, whatever. Um but yeah, it's something very basic about our contemporary news ecosystem. Although, one thing I will say, and I think it's always really important to come back to, is that people people believe things that are lies mostly because they want to believe them. Anybody with their eyes open, if you are if you are a someone who has conservative politics, um, but actually thinks about news in some sense as actual news, it's not a secret that Fox peddles all sorts of crap that is either very tendentious or disingenuous or just a lot of time fake, right? And we see a lot of, again, a lot of sort of kind of good government media studies types, like, oh, we need to work on people's media literacy and the threat of disinformation. And these things, the threat of disinformation is real. But again, people watch Fox News, consume Fox News, believe Fox News largely because they want to. They want, at a basic level, they want to be told things that are not true, or they want to be told things that um, that confirm their beliefs, and whether they're true or not is fine print and a negotiable thing. And that's that's a tough thing for a society to deal with. I mean, we all have that to some extent. We are all it is in the nature of things that we, as humans, we are looking for things that confirm our worldview. That is a natural uh, human tendency. But we are also kind of in the modern world wanting to challenge that with reality. And that is not something that is built into the contemporary American right. And it's not something that CNN doing a better job, never making a mistake, is going to change. That's not what it's about. It is something deeply ideological and in many ways part and parcel with the broader authoritarian trend in American political culture.
I think that's right. And I think the fact that this week in particular, we've seen these kind of right wing outrage scandals be really just kind of fully imaginary, not like being mad over, you know, Biden's handling of the border. That's something that I think most people in good faith would say, well, that's pretty hypocritical. You didn't care about it under Trump. All those things are valid, but at least it's rooted in reality. Like there is, obviously our immigration system is plagued with problems, but I think the fact that this week in particular we've seen really just completely fabricated things to be mad about also just shows that when you've crafted yourself into the party of opposition and nothing but opposition for, I don't know, like at least a decade now, there's just not that much other stuff to take up your time. And as we've talked about on the pod before, the difficulty Republicans have had in A, villainizing Biden in general, and B, finding kind of a good hooky way to object to his legislating, or Democrats legislating so far, has kind of left them really scrambling for things to convey to their audience that will get this, like, the anger and the grievance and the emotional resonance that keeps these people coming back for more, because oh my god, your life is under threat from XYZ, and here's all the things you have to be afraid of. And that's what Fox runs on. That's what
Right.
they need. And I just think this week is such a good kind of microcosm and how they've really struggled to do that during the Biden administration, and how they're being mad about a fake meat ban and a fake book dispersal instead of the infrastructure plan, because they're really struggling in figuring a way to make that seem really scary.
Yeah, it's funny, and we talked about this off air, that it's a little hard for me to get a handle on, because on the one hand, uh, because of how Biden has pitched this stuff, no apologies. We're not going to get worried about the debt. We're not going to worry about this. I'm going to spend a ton of money and I'm going to rebuild all the roads, and just very frontal and aggressive. Um that's one part of it. The country is ideologically in a different place, or at least the center left and the center of the US politically is in a different place. The right is further right, but uh, I'm not sure you'd say the left is further left. Basically, there's a lot of different reasons why Republicans have struggled to, they didn't vote for the relief plan, but at a basic level, they just kind of said, it's too big, and we're never going to vote for it, so whatever, and kind of move on, right? They didn't seem to get much traction with the infrastructure bill. They have focused largely on, a lot of it isn't really infrastructure. It's taking care of your grandparents, home care and caring economy, and you know, there's a you can certainly argue that uh, home care for the elderly is certainly not traditionally what people mean by infrastructure, but like whatever, it's just a word, right? You kind of are you do you sort of you need to make some uh, argument on the merits. And one thing people have brought up is like, oh, it's are you really demonizing, funding taking care of people with dementia? Like, oh, that's terrifying. And that's one of these things that, I mean, first of all, it is a lot of money. It is a in many ways a new federal responsibility, proposed federal responsibility. But it is also something that really cuts across the society. Lots of people of all political stripes have elderly relatives, and again, it's not only elderly. I mean, some people need care who are relatively young but have various physical ailments, blah 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 blah. But it's not that only liberals have grandparents who have advanced, dementia or Alzheimer's or all these kind of things, and need care and all that. So it's a little hard to uh it's a little hard to demonize, and so they're kind of operating on this technicality. Well, it's not infrastructure, and I mean, like, okay, I mean, I guess, like, who cares? Like, fine, don't call it infrastructure. Do you want to pay for it or not? At the same time, I keep going back to 2009 and the beginning of the Obama administration. And Obama did a lot of stuff that was very different. It was also a different political moment, although similar in some ways, coming out of a massive public crisis of all sorts of dimensions. And there was a similar sense of Republicans just coming up with all sorts of nonsensical stuff, death panels. And I remember our folks at TPM, a lot of the society collectively saying, "Oh my God, these guys are just going off the deep end. It's all this nonsense." And yet their oppositionism paid off big time in 2010. And I don't, it's hard to say. I'm not exactly sure how to disentangle those things, because at some level, um, the country was still kind of a wreck in 2010. They had passed Obamacare, but you didn't have Obamacare. One of the stupidest things they did with Obamacare, that I think Democrats will never make this mistake again. It's let's pass something that is very demagoguable, that there's new taxes for, there's new regulations for, but you won't actually get any low cost healthcare until like 5 years from now, which is like totally insane. Like, let's set it up so we can lose a few elections before anybody finds out what we're even talking about. It wasn't actually 5 years, but it was a few years. Kind of crazy stuff. So it's hard to it's hard to know, especially because we sort of assume that the 2022 midterm is not going to be great for Democrats. Maybe we're wrong, but I think that's at least everybody's kind of default assumption. So it's a little, Republicans can often sort of kind of preach nonsense all the way to electoral victory, and who knows? But it does seem basically different now than I at least remember it 12 years ago.
Yeah, I think a piece of that too is the the subset of Republicans who at least are invested in looking like they have an ideological commitment has just shrunk so much. And I think you can see that especially with infrastructure. Josh Kavinsky and I did kind of a series of articles about Republicans unveiling their counter proposal to Biden's infrastructure plan. And it's crafted to be dead on arrival. It's like they've removed almost every conceivable way to pay for it because they refuse taxes and refuse to do any deficit spending, which leaves you with what exactly? Their idea is kind of like, well, not all the money has been spent from CARES and XYZ, and we can repurpose that and tax the people who use the infrastructure, is a phrase they keep saying, even though when people follow up and are like, how do you tax people for using pipes? There tend not to be a lot of answers for that. But that kind of, it shows you how much that contingent has shrunk, because you have, Romney and like Shelley Moore Capito and those types who are putting that together. But Republicans have hardly even talked about it since they unveiled it, and Capito was kind of frank with reporters where she had a quote that was along the lines of, we don't put anything on the table and shame on us, which I think just kind of encapsulated that this is a,
Like, we need a placeholder
right,
to
right.
right.
I think this encapsulated the idea that for this small group of Republican senators, like there is a sense of embarrassment if they don't counter with anything, if they don't have any legislation at all to point to, even though what they put out was essentially like a bullet pointed list and, was described as like a conceptual document, a beginning document, a way to enter negotiations kind of thing. So it's, it's not anything real,
Right.
but it does show that at least these people feel a sense of shame or feel not totally comfortable with the idea of just objecting to the Democrats' plan for objection's sake, obstructing for obstruction's sake. But that group is so small and not at all kind of what the bulk of the caucus has been talking about, even in the week since they've unveiled it.
Yeah, the one thing again, and I have written a number of posts on the site, both expressing my own uncertainty and kind of engaging with readers' ideas about this, trying to get a handle of what this politics, what this 2021 politics is about, how it functions, what the dynamics are, what the issues are. And the one thing I am struck by is there is pretty little ideological counter to what Biden is trying to do. Basically saying, we need to give people more money. We need to give sort of middle class, working poor people more money, and we need to rebuild everything. And that's going to cost a ton of money. And basically, we're not really going to worry about adding to the federal debt. Republicans have not really made much of an argument against those core points. And some of that is because spent a ton of money under Trump, sent out checks. Some of it's that. I think some of it is a general sense that has become more deep seated and less challenged, that wow, everything's falling apart. And I think this comes from a lot of different, and I even imagine at some level it has been this sense has been deepened by COVID, in the sense that we went into this, and yes, Trump was a disaster and made it much worse than it had to be. But I think it has had a big impact on the national psyche, sort of like, what the fuck? They've got no COVID in Taiwan. And like, China got a handle on this pretty quickly. And Europe at various points was doing better than we are. Now, there's a lot of different moving parts to that, right? Obviously, with China, you have a political culture that allows a coercion in ways that is never going to fly in the United States. But I do think that has sort of pierced this sense of like, yeah, we're America, we're rich, we know how to do stuff, we're gonna lead the way. I think that really kind of impacted people, and certainly over the years I hear, one of the things people see a lot is that they see American airports and they go to foreign airports. And I cannot tell you how many people, it's just the kind of a thing people discuss. More affluent people, since it's people who are doing a lot of foreign travel, of like, wow, why is our stuff so much more broken down? Like, aren't we the richest country in the world? All that kind of stuff. So I think the premises of what Biden is trying to do, yes, they're opposing it all, but it's not a. It's very different from what the '90s were like, or the aughts were like, or even the teens were like, and I think that's one reason why you're seeing this the meat thing, a lot of this stuff about climate. Climate has culture war dimensions to it. They're going to take away my hamburger, right? They're going to take away my car, all this kind of stuff. I'm not going to be able to do this or that or the other. Culture war is that's their sweet spot. They're trying to kind of get it there, but it's a new time, and I don't think they have a handle on
Yeah.
it, and I don't really have a handle on it myself.
Yeah, so we're going a bit short on time, so let's switch over to talk a little bit about Biden's speech tonight, which is basically a State of the Union, even though it's not called that. It's just called a joint address to Congress. Kind of his first major speech of his presidency. Presidents usually deliver this earlier in their first term, kind of still in the inauguration afterglow. But the fact that Biden has kind of pushed it down the road a bit, both related to the pandemic and now, might not be such a bad thing because he can kind of celebrate the stuff he's gotten done already instead of it just being here's my plans and promises kind of speech. So it's going to look a little different. Really.
Is that the reason why
Mhm.
why it was delayed? Since Democrats control Congress, they could have had this a week in. Is the idea that it just there was nothing to be achieved by coming in a week, a week in and saying, "Hey, I'm gonna try to do a lot of great stuff on COVID. Let's see how it goes."
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to say because Democrats
Is that
were
is that
very
the yeah
much doing the whole we're busy trying to pass climate relief right now. We'll get to speeches when we get to speeches. So hard to say what the kind of
right
behind the
right
scenes thinking was. But yeah, that sounds right to me. Um, but it's gonna be very small. We're only gonna have about 200 people in attendance. Usually there are over 1,000. They didn't even need a designated survivor because most of the cabinet is not going to be there. We're probably only going to have John Roberts of the
right.
Supreme Court bunch. Um, and some the Biden administration has been leaking some things that he's going to talk about tonight. He's going to celebrate the COVID milestones and the vaccination rates and everything like that. But the heart of the speech is going to be the official unveiling of the American Families Plan, which is the care for the human infrastructure piece of his infrastructure package, the kind of the partner to the jobs and physical infrastructure plan that he unveiled the very end of March. So this is kind of the complement to that. And a lot of the speech will be, getting the American people familiar with what he's proposing to do, how he's proposing to pay for it. The kind of human infrastructure piece is going to be he wants to pay for it by solely taxing rich people and beefing up IRS. IRS's budget to go after tax evaders, and then you have the jobs piece is going to be primarily funded by raising corporate tax rates. So those are the two kind of pillars of his speech tonight.
And basically, again, we were talking about this off the air, that what they seem to be doing now is this is all stuff that was sort of under the infrastructure rubric originally, and now they have sort of broken up, sort of hard infrastructure, roads, broadband, I guess, and then caring economy. And they each have their own name now. That I guess I'm not sure it's a concession to Republicans, but a concession to some in the Democratic caucus who want that. Now, we've seen in just the last couple days, there have been a few reports that there are these kind of negotiations with Republicans going on in the background about the hard infrastructure side, and the Republicans at least saying, "Hey, it seems like we're making some progress." And so I guess what at least maybe some moderate Democrats want is the idea that you have a kind of a hard infrastructure only bill that would probably be smaller than proposed, but the idea at least is that it would get bipartisan support, and then the Democrats do the caring economy thing alone later, presumably using reconciliation. Is that the basic idea?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Now, of course, the problem with that is if you think about even with a smaller hard infrastructure bill to go through regular order, you need 10 Republicans. And we've talked about that before. Like, there really just aren't 10 Republican senators who can be called moderate in any sense of the word. So you're really, I think, putting a lot of eggs in the basket of Republicans are going to act like their predecessors and consider infrastructure a bipartisan issue, which seems a bit optimistic given all that we've seen, which is why I think there is some Democratic contention about how to do this. And there are some Democrats as prominent as Dick Durbin, who's, Schumer's right-hand man, saying we should do this all together, put it all in one package with, the unsaid, kind of meaning behind that being we're not going to get the 10 Republicans, so we should make the best of the one guaranteed reconciliation vehicle we have left and just shove through like a $4 trillion package with the hard and the soft infrastructure together.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of breaking them up does kind of worry me. Like, let's assume a very an extreme hypothetical that you are actually going to get Republicans to support anything that both parties can agree on hard infrastructure. I mean, again, that's a big leap of faith. But as a hypothetical, let's assume that, and let's assume you get 10, an even bigger assumption. Okay, my concern there would be you get Republicans able to say, "Yep, we got you all these roads," kind of, allow them to participate in what is, pretty popular stuff, jobs, roads, broadband, all this kind of stuff. Let them participate in that, and let Democrats kind of go it on their own on what I think will be a harder sell. Maybe it shouldn't be a harder sell. I think that stuff's popular, the caring economy stuff, but that is just going to be a harder sell. Everybody agrees we want good roads. That's kind of universal. As you said, even a relatively recent Republican Party pretty gung ho on infrastructure. So I worry that you have a situation where the Republicans get on board for the easy stuff, for the stuff that's really popular and really visible, and Democrats have to kind of take the stuff, take the harder lift on their own. Like, why would you do that?
Yeah.
Right. And that's not even getting into what would you have to give up on hard infrastructure to get any Republicans to come on board. I mean, my understanding is basically, not surprisingly, they're basically saying no tax cut, no tax hikes at all. We won't support any tax hikes. Well, that's kind of a non-starter. Right. I mean, if that, and I mean, God forbid you end up with a situation. I mean, I can't imagine they would allow this, but if let them pay for this, let them vote for the spending and let Democrats come back later and raise money to fund it. There's just, but there is also, I would imagine, a really tough dance that Biden and Schumer have to do, because to get 50 votes on anything, they are needing to rely probably on 7 or 8 Democratic senators who really want that bipartisan bill. That's really important to them. For whatever reason it's important to them, it's really important to them. So it's, they're going to have to finesse it. Why are they, since they have not, why is he focusing on the caring economy stuff in this speech when it seems like hard infrastructure is going to go first, and that is so popular? I don't get that. I don't, why wouldn't he kind of wrap himself in that, or wrap himself in both? I don't get why they're focusing on that.
Well, I think a part of it is that he's just unveiling the caring one tonight, so we don't necessarily know as of now if that is going to be the heart of the speech. There is a chance that he could kind of be like, here's infrastructure part 1 and here's infrastructure part 2, but so far I think there's been a focus on part 2 because we don't know what it is yet. But I do want to wrap in a reader question we got, because we are kind of running out of time, and it's related to what we're talking about right now. This is from Tim, who says, do you think legislation is being rushed through Congress right now without a clear understanding of the details because of the pandemic emergency, or because Democrats fear losing one of the chambers of Congress in 2022? And it's interesting because I think this question kind of directly flows into what we're talking about right now, which is, when I was prepping for the pod, I realized that I wasn't even aware of what part of infrastructure he was going to talk about tonight. Like, I don't think I even knew that this was this event was going to be the unveiling of part two. And that does say something, because it shows you how much Democrats are keeping things close to the vest right now. Because it is a little bit confusing. They announced hard infrastructure. Now, this is the unveiling of soft, but hard hasn't passed, and we still don't know a lot about the hard infrastructure or where negotiations are. And Dick Durbin came out just yesterday, advocating for it being put together instead of two. So they clearly haven't even hammered out that detail yet. And I think it's a bit of a commentary on what Tim is asking here, which I think, yes, I think pandemic emergency was a huge part of getting the relief bill through fast. And I think losing the Chamber of Congress, losing the House probably is also a huge part of this. They realize they've got like a 1 year window to get this done before people start campaigning. But I also think this is a byproduct of the fact that right now Democrats mostly only have to keep their caucus together to get stuff passed. That won't be true when we're out of reconciliation vehicles, but that's true right now. And I think we've seen how different that looks on the public facing side when all your negotiations are internal and when you're all batting for the same team. So you don't really have a ton of impetus to, leak things to the press or to have these fights kind of out in public, which is also, I think, a commentary on the kind of remarkable unification Democratic leadership has managed to achieve so far. The fact that we've only kind of had these little splinter arguments on things like, the SALT tax from the New York Congression, and like little things like that. But on the whole, we don't know a lot about what's going on. And I think that kind of speaks, it's what we've talked about before, kind of the opaque sense of this. And I think that just shows kind of how much inter-Democrat dealing is happening right now.
Yeah, I mean, I would push back a little on Tim's point about, rushing through and we don't really know what's in there. I think broadly speaking, we know what's in these bills, or like, we don't know yet on the carrying con, but we will, right? I mean, they're going to announce it, and they've already talked about, on the infrastructure plan. So I don't think it's a sense like you're rushing things through and like, oh, we didn't even know what we passed. I think we do know these bills are so big, it's a little hard for the press to I mean, you saw that with the relief bill. I mean, the whole thing was there, right? But there was so much, and a lot of it was so technical.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little hard to explain it all. I think we basically know what's there. I don't think there's a huge amount of disagreement among Democrats on what you want to do, what you want to spend on. But there is this, as you said, there is a basic understanding that Democrats are going to have to do this lift on their own regardless. And that means they need literally unanimity. Everybody has to agree on something. And so a lot of the action, a lot of the kinetics is, as you said, stuff in the background. And so the politics of it is opaque. But that's not the same as the policies being opaque or the spending, what's being spent on opaque. But back to Tim's question, I think it is 100%. Democrats see this 2-year cycle as, if not existential for the future of the country and the future of the Democratic Party, pretty close. That there are structural factors that make them very pessimistic that they will continue to be in power after 2 years. I mean, almost certainly Biden will be president for 4 years, but in terms of controlling Congress, and they think, given what happened under Trump, given the trends in national politics, they need to max out quickly to have a hope of both changing and saving the country, but also changing the political economic trajectory of the country. You need to basically show very quickly and very tangibly, this is what government can do. This is why government is important. And I think that's it. I think they have kind of one last chance. As hyperbolic and extreme as that sounds, and to a great extent, I think they're right. The only question to me is that there are all these other things, particularly a voting rights bill that you kind of also need to to get through in this this narrow window. And it seems very questionable whether that's going to be possible because of the filibuster, and you can't do that through you can't do that through budget reconciliation.
So, on that grim note, I think we'll wrap things
Yes.
up. I do have two tasks for you, our beloved listeners. One, send us in your questions. No dumb questions. Also, even if there's something you want us to talk about that's not necessarily a question, that's fine too. And two, Biden's big speech tonight. Senator Tim Scott will do the Republican rebuttal afterwards. Josh Kavinsky and I will be heading our coverage team of that at TPM. So stay with us through the speeches. We'll be live blogging and your go-to source for information tonight.
Right. And remember, the Josh Marshall podcast is brought to you by Grady's Cold Brew Iced Coffee. If you're ready to give it a try, you can get 25% off your first order at Grady'sColdBrew.com with promo code TPM. That's Grady'sColdBrew.com with promo code TPM. All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Later.